All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am Mike Seifert, the Operations Commander with your Mercer Island Police Department. As you all know, hopefully, we are here tonight to talk about coyotes. In light of increased sightings and concerns of coyote activity, the city and the police department have reached out to our partner agencies to seek assistance in this area. Several weeks ago, the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife referred us to the USDA's Wildlife Services Division, and we connected with one of their experts, Matt Stevens. Matt Stevens is the Assistant District Supervisor and Urban Coyote Coordinator for the USDA's Wildlife Services Western District. He is an expert in wildlife management and has studied coyote behavior, especially in urban settings, for over 20 years. And he has also launched an urban coyote program in response to increased requests for assistance from the public, like we've had here on the island. Matt will share the results of his initial assessment and his recommendations for the best approach and possible next steps. Tonight, we also have with us Chris Hoffman, who will be facilitating this meeting. So at this point, I will hand it over to Chris. Chris, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mike. And Matt, if you want to go to that slide, I just wanted to cover a couple logistics about tonight's meeting. Just a reminder that the meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the city's YouTube channel after the meeting. And the way that we will be interacting with you tonight after the presentation, we'll be asking you to provide any questions or comments you might have about tonight's presentation. And you can type those in at any time using the question and answer box that you can find at the bottom of your screen. We are going to hold responding to those questions until after the presentation, because it's fairly likely that Matt will get to some of those questions throughout the presentation. And your questions and comments will be able to be seen by all attendees, and we will do our best to respond to all of them orally again after the presentation. So that's kind of a little bit of logistics. And now I'm going to turn it over to Matt to dive into the presentation itself.
Okay, thanks, Scott. And thanks, Mike. That's a good introduction. I appreciate that. So I've talked with some of you people that are watching now, I'm sure. I've spoken to you. The city came because of increased observations and interactions with coyotes on the island. The city had come to us and asked for some sort of an assessment or investigation, or you can call it what you will, of coyote behavior, coyote activity throughout the island. And so with that request, that's what I did. Me and a coworker made a site visit to the island. We talked with residents, and some of the folks at the city forwarded me on a ton of next door postings and other posts from social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, and whatnot. And with all of that information, I tried to make the best assessment I could on what's going on. But what we're going to do tonight, or what I'd like to do, is kind of give a brief overview of coyotes, coyote behavior, coyote life cycle, that sort of thing. Just because there's a ton of questions around that. There's a lot of fear around coyotes because of their predatory nature and that sort of thing. And so I'm hoping that with this information, we can kind of squash a little bit of that and then answer anybody's questions or concerns at the end. So with that, I'm going to get started here. So first off, just a little background about USDA Wildlife Services and that maybe the difference. Some people confuse what we do versus what the Department of Fish and Wildlife does, the State Department. First off, we're a non-regulatory agency. We don't carry a badge or write tickets. We don't manage game laws, that sort of thing. The State Department of Fish and Wildlife is who manages wildlife populations. So the way to think about it is they manage the wildlife and we help manage the damage or the threat created by wildlife, but we are not out trying to figure out how many deer over here, elk or coyotes, that sort of thing. We literally just respond to requests from people who are asking for our assistance. We don't solicit our work. We only go out when we're asked to. And so why exactly are we here today? Well, first off, there's just a lot of misnomers or misinformation or fear that gets put out. People just aren't educated about what coyotes are, what they do. And whenever you're dealing with wildlife in general, especially in a situation like this with coyotes, there's a big emotional response from one side or the other. You know, some people are going to, you know, they hate coyotes, they want them all dead, and then the polar opposite of that, you know, don't touch a hair on their head, and then everything in between. And so hopefully what we're going to do today is kind of just works through some of that. And like I said, at the end, we can still address questions and concerns, but I'm hoping that the information we have here will be helpful. So very quickly, for people that don't know what a coyote is or are not familiar with it, they're a canine member of the dog family. They come in a variety of colors. They're both a predator and a scavenger. And in fact, I would argue that they scavenge a lot more than they predate. A large adult coyote in the state of Washington, Western Washington, is going to be 35 pounds. That's about as big as they're going to get. And they're the second fastest land mammal, right behind the pronghorn antelope in North America. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go through these slides as if we're kind of calls that we take when people call and are concerned about things. In the summertime, when people call us, we typically hear, well, these coyotes are really sick. They don't have, you know, much fur. They look like they're hungry, and in most cases, they're not sick. You know, they're healthy. It's just that they don't have their big thick winter coat on, and so they look lanky and maybe like they might be sick. But you can see here the difference of the color variation between this breeding pair here. It's quite different, and this is typically what we see in Washington, kind of a grayish color. Okay, and in the winter time, you know, if I had a nickel for every time I heard, boy, it was the size. I saw a coyote and it was the size of a German Shepherd. And that's just not the case. In fact, coyotes aren't even half the size of a German Shepherd. They just look like it. When you have a coyote that looks like this and they've got a big puffy winter coat on, they look a lot bigger than what they are. But you can see this is literally the average size, 20 to 30 pounds. I personally have handled 4 coyotes in my entire career that have exceeded 40 pounds. So it just doesn't happen very often. 30 pounds is about as big as you're going to get. All right, coyotes are territorial, and they set up they essentially have a boundary, and they defend that territory against other coyotes. And in Western Washington or in urban environments, that territory tends to be smaller than out in the country in the rural setting. And I'm going to get to that in more detail. But what you might see along, you know, canine or domestic dogs typically urinate to mark a territorial boundary, or they'll find where another dog peed and they'll pee over the top of it. Coyotes tend to do that by defecating. And so you might find big piles of it in areas where there's a high concentration of coyotes. So the way this works is you get a dominant pair, an alpha pair. They breed. They'll stay together unless something happens to one of them. Then they'll find another mate. But you'll get this alpha pair that will establish a territory. And during that time, when they're kind of doing this territory establishment, they're kind of focused on each other, and so you'll find that the conflict with humans really isn't all that great compared to other times of the season that we're going to go through now. You know, during breeding season in February, that's when things might get a little bit more territorial. The male coyote is oftentimes still trying to win favor of the female and make sure that no transient males are coming in to try to get with his lady. And they actually view domestic dogs as kind of an intruder as well. They don't see him as a domestic dog, they just see him as a threat. And we're going to get into detail on what happens when they get that way, why people oftentimes have coyotes come to them when they're dogs on a leash. Okay, this is the time of year when they're rearing pups. They have a 60-day gestation. They bred in February, so they drop pups in April. And during this time, they wean in 30 days. So from April to June, you know, these coyotes they've invested a lot into these pups. And so they're going to definitely try to defend those pups more. So that's when people might be hiking a park or a canyon or something, and they come across a coyote that maybe barking and acting aggressively. It's because they're typically protecting a den of pups. Also, they're hypersensitive to canine threats, but they're also out trying to eat more because mom is producing milk and trying to make sure that those babies are being fed properly. June through October is when the pups start. They're outside the den. They're moving around with mom and dad a lot more, and they're vocalizing a lot more. They're trying to find their voice. They get lost and they're howling to their parents to try to figure out how to get home. And so that's when when we get calls this time of year, we're hearing them a lot more. We're seeing them a lot more. They followed us down a trail. This is typically what's going on is mom and dad are teaching them how to get through life. And the reason why is here in October, that's when mom and dad are kicking their pups out, and they're saying, you got to go find your own place to live. And they may hold over a pup or two, and typically they're females. We get a lot of calls that say, I think there's a pack of coyotes out here. And typically that's not the case. They're not like wolves. They're not a pack animal, but they will hold over a pup or two from, like, say, this year's litter, to help rear pups of the next year. So essentially help babysit their siblings in another litter. But what you have is now that they've been kicked out, you have a lot of transient coyotes, brothers and sisters and whatnot, who are out roaming around the environment, trying to find their own place to live. And so you do get a lot of people at that point coming in contact with 2s or 3s or 4s. And really, they're just dispersing out, trying to find their own place to live. And they're continually bumping into other coyotes. And so, and the island is a little different. This is a different situation, and we're going to get to that. But this is typically what you would see. Let's see. You can see up here in the right, I kind of labeled this time frame the teenage time frame. This is the critical time for people when they see coyotes, to be harassing and making coyotes feel unwelcome. These young coyotes don't know what to do, and if they're finding food or people are feeding them, that sort of thing, then you're going to have a big problem on your hands. But if you're able to keep these coyotes wild by hazing them and harassing them, and we'll get to it, shooting them with paintball guns, whatever, this is the time frame to do it. The young coyotes will most likely respond best to that. Okay, so real quickly, we'll touch on disease, because we get calls a lot. To, oh yeah, this rabid coyotes in the backyard, it's acting weird, and this. Well, and there's never been one single case ever documented in the state of Washington of a coyote carrying rabies. So, and in fact, they very rarely carry in Washington, like distemper or parvo, things like that. We just don't see much of that. So when people see sick coyotes, like this guy here, and I've got another slide, it's usually caused by a mite, sarcoptic mange, where mites lay eggs under the skin of the coyote, and then the coyote gets to rubbing and itching, and it scratches all its hair off, and it's a terrible, these coyotes are going to die a terrible death with this. And so we do our best to go, if we get a call on this, we try to get these animals euthanized. We'll be doing them a favor. Once they get to this point, they're in bad shape. They're not going to make it. And this is something that is so infrequent that spread to a domestic pet, especially if the pet owner keeps up with shots and vaccines. It shouldn't be. I haven't even heard of mange. Like a dog might get it, but they quickly recover from it. Okay, another thing I just wanted to quickly cover is what coyotes vocalize. When they're out howling, when you hear a coyote howl, they're not just howling for the fun of it. They have a very intricate communication system, and so they're actually saying something each time. Like this list here, they might just be doing a greeting howl and trying to figure out if there's somebody else around. They may be breeding and looking for a mate. They might be telling you that they see it, they busted you, and they know something's not quite right. They may be mad at another coyote. But most importantly, what I'd like to say is that what the coyotes, when they're sounding off, what it doesn't mean, because what I hear all the time is, oh boy, these coyotes just killed something in my yard. They're howling like crazy. And well, if you think about it, if you were a predator and there's other predators around and you just killed something, would you want to announce it to every other predator around? Or I wouldn't. If a cougar or something might come try to steal it from me, so I try to be as quiet as I can. And it's the same thing when they're out hunting. They're not going to make a bunch of racket trying to sneak up on prey. So it's just a bit of a misnomer. When you hear coyotes, they're typically communicating with one another that has nothing to do with food or killing. Most of the time I give this presentation, I'm standing in front of a big group of people in an auditorium, and I've got a little sound clip here. I think it'll play, hopefully. And what I ask is, how many coyotes do you think you hear in this clip? And so I'm going to play it, and then a slide will pop up that shows you how many it is. No, I didn't play. I must have not hit that share sound. Anyway, this audio clip sounds like it's a dozen coyotes, and in reality, it's only 2 or 3. So you might think that there's a bunch around, but in reality, it's typically not. It's a small pair family unit. So this is something that we hear all the time, and I'm sure there's people on this watching this right now that have heard this or say this. What do you expect? Where are these coyotes supposed to go? And you could plug it into any animal, deer, anything. And in reality, this isn't necessarily true with coyotes. Here, pre-settler, you can see on the map on the left, this is where the coyote native home range was, essentially between the Rockies and the Mississippi. And then when wolves were exterminated, you can see now where coyotes live. So they never were native to the coasts. That, and then another thing I'll say about it is, if we go back here, coyotes go where there's food. And so if you were to say, I don't know, take any community in Mercer Island or whatnot, and I was to, let's say I trapped out every coyote that's on the island, which I think there's only 2 or 3 of, but let's say I got them all. As long as there's food available on the island, then there's a high probability that there'll be more coyotes there. And we're going to get to that in greater detail, but it has little to do with us pushing them out of their native area or clearing timber where they lived. Coyotes they will go anywhere. They can live in any environment, and they will go anywhere where they can eat. So here, this is just kind of giving an idea that Mercer Island is not a unique scenario. Over the past decade or so, we have responded to well over 2,000 calls and helped people in one way or another throughout the greater Seattle area, the big 3 counties here. And so I was actually surprised to find out that there has been little to no coyote activity on Mercer Island ever until now. That's what people have been seeing over the last few months, because everywhere since I've worked for the agency, there has not been one place that I've ever gone where there hasn't been coyotes at some point, and typically they're there. I mean, Ballard, Magnolia, very populated areas of Seattle, there's coyotes living there right now. So why the city? Well, just as I alluded to, they go where the food is. And if you're out in the country, and I use this kind of diagram to illustrate what I'm talking about. If you live out, let's say these coyotes live out, we'll take a 10 square mile radius here of what coyotes might be eating and searching for out in the country. They're eating rodents and reptiles. They might come across a dead animal, or they're hunting large game. And in the city, the same, say 10 square miles, they're eating some rodents, but they've got garbage to pick through. There's fruit on the ground. People leave pet food on the porch. And then of course, people leave their pets out at night. And believe it or not, some people are purposely feeding the coyotes and raccoons and stuff like that. And so out in the country, because resources aren't nearly as abundant, you'll have less coyotes because they have to work harder to get their food. Whereas in the city, the food is so prevalent that they don't need such a big territory. They literally can shrink that down because it's picture a full pantry, if you will, and then in that same area you might have 2 or 3 groups like that. So if we can eliminate some of this food source, like in this case, we get rid of a couple of these factors, maybe we reduce the coyotes there. We reduce a couple more of these factors, and then the coyote numbers go down. And the more that you can reduce, the better. You're always going to have 1 or 2 or 3 roam through an area. That seems to be pretty typical. But if the food is gone, you won't have that high concentration of animals like I was just showing earlier. So another factor of why coyotes might be more prevalent in the city, and some of you might know this, but back in the year 2000, there was an initiative put on the ballot, and the voters passed it, and it essentially outlawed certain kinds of body gripping traps. And so a lot of people that were fur trapping, that was their livelihood out in rural Washington, essentially went under. The methods they were using were outlawed. They could no longer use them. And so based on the numbers of calls that we got years later, so these people aren't trapping coyotes and the numbers go up, it would indicate or suggest that without the population control that was outside the city, when these coyotes dispersed, they started heading into the city. And again, then they figured out, there's a lot of food here. We're just going to stick around. And then after 2012, 2013, you start to see what we call saturation, where there is not much more room for new coyotes. And so we weren't getting our calls kind of leveled off, but definitely we're getting more though from, for a 4 to 6 year time frame there. So how do they lose their fear of humans? Well, first way is through positive experience. You can see this guy here actually has some sort of food or water or something out. He's got his phone and he's taking a picture of this coyote. So this coyote has absolutely no fear, because in this park, people have been, I'm sure, been doing this left and right and feeding him. And this is obviously what we want to avoid. Another experience is the neutral experience, where nothing's happening to them. No, people aren't necessarily feeding them, but people also aren't harassing them or providing them with some sort of negative stimulus. So these coyotes can just kind of roam around at free will, picking through garbage and that sort of thing. And then this is the one that we promote. We want people to give these coyotes a negative experience in one way or another. And we can talk about that in greater detail. In this case, if you have a big dog and you chase coyotes, then by all means, let them chase the coyotes. Okay, so this is where people, I'm sure, here that are listening and watching are going to, they want to know what exactly I came up with. What's the recommendation to the city? Why? What was the assessment? What came of all of the research and investigation that I did? And part of the thing that we do, that USDA Wildlife Services does when it comes to coyotes, is we look at the kind of behavior that's occurring in a general sense. Okay, so if we start out from the most, behavior that is non-threatening to the most extreme, this is kind of the scale that we follow in a broad sense. It's not, we don't follow it to the T, but it gives us a broad way of judging whether or not it's justified to go in and remove some sort of wildlife. With coyotes, this is kind of what we look at. So you see, if the reports coming in or things that I'm talking to people about are that coyotes aren't seen very much, they're just heard, that would kind of be our number 1 spot on the scale. As we start to increase activity with coyotes, we will hear and see about coyotes that, people, a lot of lost cat posters on signposts, or people's small dogs or cats not coming home if they were left out at night. And then we'll start to see an increase of observations on streets at night and in yards. And that's kind of what I'm seeing a lot of here on Mercer Island. I just recently was sent some videos from the city that were forwarded to them of showing some coyotes walking down the street in the middle of the day. So that would that would be kind of on our number 4 here. And what we try to follow as best we can, but like I said, things are different on a case-by-case scenario, is once we start getting into these next few steps, that's when we have to decide, okay, this is something that's become a little bit more serious and something that we should look at recommending maybe some sort of a removal rather than using non-lethal methods to reduce the conflict with coyotes. Typically, when we get to 5, 6, and 7 here, non-lethal methods of harassment and that sort of thing aren't working anymore because these coyotes are just completely unfearful. So, but like I said, right here is kind of where we're at on Mercer Island. Yep, we're starting to spill into number 4, maybe here and there, but for the most part, from what I found, and there may be people that are listening and watching right now that I didn't speak to or that have experienced something more aggressive than this. But from what I found, this is typically where we're at, that people are seeing them and hearing them at night and occasionally seeing one cross the road, and a cat maybe went missing, or people even saw them maybe run across the road with their cat. And but getting down into here where we're seeing them in school grounds during the day, or when we take calls all the time of, like, I just took one the other day of a woman who was walking her dog down the street, and a coyote jumped out and grabbed the dog and the leash and everything and jerked it right out of her hand. That's a different kind of behavior than, oh, look, I saw one cross the road in the middle of the night. And so we have to decide, when is it justified and when isn't. We can't just kill things just because we don't like them. So what happens when they cross the line? Okay, there's a lot of people on here, and a lot of people I talk to that say, well, just relocate them, just trap them and relocate them. Well, we're prohibited in Washington by law in doing that. It's actually against the law to trap a coyote, beaver, raccoon, many different species. The law says that if you trap it, you have to release it on your own property. So in the city, that makes no sense, right? You wouldn't trap something and then turn around and let it go right where you trapped it. If you owned 4,000 acres, it might make sense because you could trap it and relocate it to the other side of your property if so inclined. But here we are prohibited by law from doing that. So there's other reasons why you wouldn't want to do that as well. When studies have showed that when you take a coyote and you take them and turn them out somewhere, 100 miles or more from where you trapped him, he immediately wants to try to get home, and he's trying to traverse country that he's not familiar with. They get hit by cars, they're not eating, they get shot by, the sheep rancher. It's because they're trying to get home. That's their main focus. And also, if they're not trying to go home, then they're going to try to just go to the next town. So did we actually remove the problem, or did we just move it? So we may have taken it from one place, but now we've just given that problem to somebody else, and that's not fair either. And then, of course, you could always trap a sick animal and then go release it out into the wild, and it spreads, amongst all of the healthy population out there. And then it could just be a temporary fix. Like I said, there's always a vacuum. If there's an area that has a high population of aggressive coyotes, and we continue to remove those, new coyotes typically just move in. So the solution is not just to remove coyotes. It may be part of the solution, but a greater part of the solution is to make sure that any new coyotes that come in maintain their wild state, and that we're not providing them with food. So we have to look at it as kind of a multi-prong approach to this. So there are many cases where we'll go into an area and where there has been very significant aggressive, like the one that we removed in Kirkland not long ago. It was a very aggressive coyote. And there was a little family group there, and we removed this one coyote, and the rest of the coyotes, they bolted. They never heard or saw them again. And so there are times when that does work. that, in my assessment, there's not even enough coyotes on Mercer Island to have that theory come into play. I think there's literally only 2 coyotes on the island, maybe 4, but we'll get to that. So when it comes to having coyotes around, this is not a popular thing on Mercer Island, what I'm about to say, but when you're used to being able to let your pets out for as long as you've lived on the island, and now all of a sudden you have coyotes. I had one person I spoke to said that their cat was, they didn't have kids and their cat was like their child, and I get that. I get our pets are family members, companion animals. However, I don't know of anybody that would leave their child unattended outside at night. So if you care about your pets, then you might want to bring them in, especially now that you know coyotes are there. And again, that removes one of these components of a food source. If there's no pets outside, then coyotes aren't going to be in your yard. If you have pets in your yard that are left out at night, it's almost a guarantee that that pet is going to get taken. So that's my number one recommendation, is to bring your pets in. This idea, these coyotes, I'm sure, are going to be around. And even if these coyotes were removed, there's still going to be coyotes around. So this is just something that is a message that we give to everybody, no matter what community is, let alone whether it's Mercer Island or Redmond or Whidbey Island or whatever. This slide shows where the concentration of, this is the information I gathered from talking with people. How are we doing on time? Are we good? Yeah, okay. That I've talked to people, or that I took off of like Nextdoor, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff that was sent to me. And you can see here that so the red is September, or excuse me, October sightings. The blue, I think, was in September. And then this yellow was all the way back in like July. This purple marker here shows I put that as a different color because that was like a concentration of 8 or 10 observations of coyotes in that one particular spot. So this is all around that Pioneer Park area. Okay, up here is at the Luther Burbank Park. There were some observation of coyotes there as well. But I wanted to just throw this slide on there so people here could see where these coyotes are. And it's probably not much of a surprise to many of you that Pioneer Park would be an area where coyotes would like to live. But the reason I think that there's only maybe 2 pairs, I doubt it, but I think there's only 2 coyotes on this entire island, is that a coyote can cover one end of this island 3 times in one night from one end to the other. This is typically the home range of a pair of coyotes, maybe 2 pairs, or a territory, I mean. So all of the photos and videos and everything that I've seen, nobody that I talked to either had seen more than 2 coyotes at one time. Most observations are of 1 coyote and sometimes of a pair. So anyway, my formal recommendation to the city was until something drastically changes, there's no threat here to human health and safety. Nobody is experienced anything that would lead me to believe that these coyotes are going to attack somebody. And unfortunately for a lot of people here, that, like I said, they don't want to hear it, but having a pet taken is easily remedied by bringing your pet inside. So anyway, I wanted to just throw this on here too, because there's just so much fear around coyotes, and are my kids going to get bit, that sort of thing. And so these are just a few statistics that I've thrown together here. But of the last 15 years, every single day, every day in this country, 12,000 people get bit by a dog. Every 5 days, 1 person gets bitten by a coyote. So that's quite a difference, right? You should be much more worried about your neighbor's dog than a coyote. Like walking through the park, you're going to have much higher chance of coming in contact with a dog to bite you than you would a coyote. Okay, human fatalities. In the last 15 years, 11,000 people have died from mosquitoes or mosquito-borne illness. 750 people have been struck by lightning and killed. 400 people have been killed by domestic dogs. And one person in all of recorded history in the United States has ever been killed by a coyote. One other in Canada in 2008 or 9. In this case, in 1981, it was a 3-year-old daughter who was left home by herself while her mother went to the grocery store. She walked out the front door and was attacked by a coyote, and a neighbor got her and ran her to the hospital, and she died of her wounds. So if mom was home, that probably incident never would have happened. So when we get those calls and we talk and people want to know, well, what about it? Yep, it's true that kids get bit, people get bit. It does happen. Wild animals are unpredictable. In Southern California, they have a huge problem with coyotes biting people. But even then, statistically, the odds are much greater of other bad things happening to you than being in contact with a coyote. So there's going to be a lot of questions, I'm sure, and maybe more specifics about, how I collected information that I did or that sort of thing, or just people have questions in general. But that's what this time is for. I kind of moved through that information quicker than what I normally would, because I know it's a very unique scenario here on Mercer Island, because from what I can tell, there has been little to no coyote activity ever out here until recently. And so it's a new thing, and people need to, we need to talk about it and see where we're going to go with it. As I said before, we have that 7-step sliding scale, if you will. We don't hold to that by, we just have to deal with things case by case. And if things were to escalate, then our recommendation to the city may change. But as of right now, we, USDA, would not be inclined to come remove any animals from the island. So with that, Chris, if we want to start going on questions and stuff, then let's do that.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, for that very informative presentation. We've got some questions in the queue, so we'll get started on those. And this first question might be for Mike, and that is about what the cost of the coyote assessment is for the city.
When we originally agreed to work with Matt, he quoted us a simple cost of $55 per hour. And I think as of this evening, we're hitting the 20-hour mark. So we were right at $1,100. So for the hours of service, which I'm sure he hasn't billed, we thank you, Matt, because I know I've talked to you probably about 20 hours myself on this.
All right, and moving on to the next question. Someone is asking about a similar service that you provided for Sky Mountain Homeowners Association, and would like you to talk about what's happened there since then, if things have gotten worse, better, what actions have been taken.
Chris, could you tell me again where was it that we did it?
Looks like Sky Mountain Homeowners Association.
I wish I could speak directly to that. I don't. It may have been one of my coworkers that I don't know. That doesn't sound familiar to me. So is that a link right there that just came up? Let's see.
Yeah.
I don't know how long ago that was, or let's see.
Looks like it was 2018, but I guess the question could be applied to other similar.
Oh, okay. Oh, this was okay. I remember this now. Yes, I went and did a talk. If I remember right, Channel 4 was there. Okay, so after that talk, I'd have to talk to one of my coworkers, but I don't even think we did any work for them. I think we did this educational talk like this, and I don't think we actually ever went in and did any direct control work there. So we don't stay in touch. I don't call and follow up with these people, that ask us. Like, I would not call residents or something after I do this for Mercer Island to follow up we would look at it, if people need our help, then they would ask us, but I don't know what happened in this community after we got done with this talk. I wish I had better information, but I don't.
All right, fair enough. And then the next question is, what is the size of a typical litter?
That's a great question. It typically has to do with the amount of resources available. So if food is highly abundant, then Mother Nature kind of tells Mama Coyote that she can have more pups. Whereas if food is scarce, then they may have maybe 1, 2, or 3. If I've come across litters that are as many as 12 or 13. So typically, just in a very rough average, you'll have somewhere between 4 and 7, something like that.
All right, next question's asking about the coyotes' physical abilities. Will they enter a fenced backyard? Can they jump a 4-foot high picket fence?
They'll go over a 4-foot fence like it's not there. Yes, the answer is yes. They'll go over it. If they can't go over it, they'll try to dig under it. But one thing to remember is that coyotes, like all animals, really, not just predators, even humans, they'll always choose the path of least resistance. And so if you've got a decent fence and all your neighbors don't, it's your neighbors who are going to suffer, not you. They're not going to jump a fence to get something that they can get next door with no fence, if that makes sense. So any fence is better than none. The higher the fence, the better. And the closer to the ground you make that fence, even better.
All right, next question is about what people can do to scare coyotes away. So can you describe how you should haze coyotes, and should elementary kids be hazing them if they see them?
So some good methods to use, or that we promote, is these, the air horns that people keep on their boats. I think they cost $10 or something at Walmart. They're really, really loud. They look like a spray paint can with a horn on top. Those work really well. What I have found that works the best are paintball guns. And for those of you that have been hit by a paintball, you know how much it hurts. And so coyotes and deer, if you got deer eating your roses or whatnot, paintballs work really, really well. But even basic things like whistles, if you're nervous about your kids walking to school or whatever, like I said, I don't think you necessarily have to be, but it never hurts to be, have a whistle around their neck. Walk in, not by yourself, walk in groups. As far as elementary school kids, if the question is if they're like see them on the playground and stuff like that, then they just immediately, that's something that we consider no tolerance. So if kids are seeing coyotes come out while they're out playing recess, they need to tell the teacher or whatnot, and get a hold of the city. That's number one as far as removing coyotes, is when they're near kids. That's the way that we look at it.
All right. We've got 3 kind of similar questions about how coyotes got here, if they swam or they traveled by land, and as a follow-up, if the island has always been free of coyotes up until now, why are they just now showing up, and are they going to be permanent in the future?
Yeah, good question. So first, how did they get there? I don't know. I mean, they could have swam. I doubt it. I'm sure they came right down the highway. It's hard to say. I don't know. Will they be there? Will they be there forever? I don't know that either. If people don't make changes, and I'll get back to it every single time, is the food. If people are purposely feeding them, inadvertently feeding them, or providing any multitude of food sources, that they're not going to go anywhere, and they're going to proliferate very well. Now, a place like Mercer Island won't support that many coyotes, so there's no danger of having them, the island inundated with, everywhere you go there's coyotes. I can't foresee there ever being more than a couple pairs of coyotes on the entire island, just because they're so territorial. But if food is abundant and their territories that they're protecting become smaller, the more coyotes that are going to be there. So If they find that they are not getting food very easily, they could leave just as readily as they came. From what I've seen, they're not going to do that. So people need to start making some changes, some permanent changes to how they're putting out their garbage. If they're composting and there's a lot of food scraps in the compost, that attracts coyotes, and it attracts rodents that attract coyotes. The Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife has a terrific thing on their website. It's very detailed on how to best eliminate food sources and how to deal with conflicts with coyotes. And so I encourage everybody to go on their website and look at that, because there's things that people don't think about, like bird feeders. Seed drops on the ground from bird feeders, and then that attracts squirrels and rats and mice, and in turn attracts predators, including coyotes. So there's a lot of things that are worth looking at that many people don't think about.
All right, now along those lines of the bird feeders, are there specific types of fruits that should be, I guess, removed from people's yards, that coyotes like to go after?
Yeah, they'll eat all fruit and berries. And so during the summer, that's what they're really focused on, is fruit. When people's, pears and apples and plums and everything are falling on the ground, blackberries are very prevalent, and that's one of their main part of their diets in late summer. So the more fruit you get picked up off the ground, the better. Otherwise, it'll just continue to be, you'll see these trees on the sides of roads that the fruit never gets picked up, and there'll always be deer under them. Well, the coyotes are coming there as well. So the more you can get off the ground, the better. I don't think you have to go cut down every fruit tree on the island. You just need to, if you own fruit trees, try to get that off the ground so it's not rotting and smelling and attracting wildlife.
All right, and this next question, person says that their kid spends time in the woods and that they're seeing aggressive behavior in Seattle with coyotes charging adults with pets. And the question is, if coyotes will charge adults with pets, why aren't kids in danger?
Well, first off, they're charging pets, not adults with pets or kids with pets. They're charging pets. And so when, let's say, Joe Blow's walking his Labrador retriever through a Gasworks Park or whatever, and a coyote becoming aggressive, it's not because he's wanting to eat the dog. It's not a big dog like that. He views that dog as a canine intruder in his territory. And so he's trying to drive that dog out. He's not after the adult. He's not trying to eat the dog. Now, if it's a little teeny dog, then it could very well be viewed as a prey item. But during most times of the year when, we get a lot of calls and, well, geez, a coyote was circling around me as I was walking down the street. And I asked, well, did you have a dog with you? Yes. If they didn't have the dog with them, the coyote wouldn't have been circling around them at all. They're literally coming to either confront another animal. They're coming out of curiosity. It's just, in most cases, people don't even attempt to scare that coyote. And so then that coyote doesn't get a negative stimulus. All they know is, oh, okay, I can just do whatever I want to do. And so that's why we encourage people to harass them in a variety of ways. But so like I said, from those statistics, and I don't know when that question came in, and I'm not saying that kids don't get bitten. They do. In 20 years, I think that 5 or 6, I don't know, a handful. We've dealt with a handful of calls out of thousands and thousands and thousands of calls. We have dealt with a few where humans had come in contact with the coyote. It's just very, very, very rare.
All right, we have a question about communication, and it's 2 parts. How should changes to human behavior be communicated? And for the city, what assistance can the city provide to make communication be effective?
I guess I'll do my best to take this one. Obviously, once we have the recommendations completed from Matt, this process that we're starting this evening We'll work with the communication management within the city to get this out through all the avenues that the city has to do. So I know this is being recorded, so this video can be shared, this meeting can get out. And I recommend that anyone who is viewing this, share it with anyone who you think it would benefit. But as far as the specifics, I don't have the answer. I do know that we will be working with the communication management of the city as soon as this is over to make sure that the information is disseminated in the ways that the city is able to do so.
All right. Thank you. And Matt, a couple questions about deterring coyotes. If there's specific ways that can be done, either with urine or cayenne pepper, or other types of things, plants that they don't like that could be placed in yards.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish there was a good answer or one that was helpful, but the fact of the matter is that putting out other animal urine, whether it's, people are marketing wolf urine and this urine and that, it's actually just attracts coyotes. So that's just a scam. Don't do any of that. Cayenne peppers and all of this sort of stuff. I've never known it to work. And in this environment with as much rain as we get, really anything you put out that may work typically just gets washed away. So no, there's not really anything from a deterrent standpoint as far as something that they would smell and want to stay away from, unfortunately.
All right, good to know. Next question is, do coyotes eat raccoons? And is there any chance that they could help with the raccoon population problem?
Yeah, they do. But I don't think many coyotes want to tangle with a raccoon, to tell you the truth. Somebody shared a video with me one time of a coyote that did attack and kill a raccoon. But I think I'd rather deal with a coyote than a raccoon. They're just pretty vicious little critters. So I would not consider them a good raccoon control tool. They'd be more apt to control deer than they would raccoons. And I did speak to a woman up at what's it called? The Pea Patch garden up there in the north end of the island, who said that they hate the deer. Oh, we hate the deer. Leave the coyotes alone. Let the coyotes kill the deer. And that kind of goes back to my opening slide where, everybody feels a little differently about wildlife. These people hate deer because the deer eat their gardens. And so they're like, yeah, let's keep the coyotes. And, anyway, you just never, raccoons, coyotes, they're not going to put a dent in the raccoon population.
All right, we have another question that I guess gets to trying to work on an issue before it becomes a larger problem, and that is, if why wait till it gets to a bad point to take more action? Why not be more proactive with it?
Well, I guess my answer would be is we are being proactive. What makes us believe that it's going to escalate to a bad problem if people do what we're talking about here? I don't think it's safe to assume that all of a sudden kids are going to get eaten and all these bad things are going to happen. I know that this is not a popular subject out here because these coyotes aren't here and people are used to a certain lifestyle. But that lifestyle is changing now. So to say, people aren't doing enough and it's going to get bad. Well, I'm not saying that it won't. And I'm not saying that things, from a recommendation standpoint or an intervention standpoint may not need to happen at some point. But based on what we know right now, we can't just, I guess my question would be can we just kill something that we don't like? I mean, should this woman that has the deer eating her garden, should we just go kill the deer? Because they were not native to the island. The answer is no, we don't do that. And so there's no difference with a coyote, especially if you've got two on the island. Now, like I said, if things escalate and become worse, something does happen, then we can reassess this. But as of now, I don't think it's good to assume that it's going to get bad. Otherwise, that wouldn't have been my recommendation. I'm not assuming that it's going to get that bad.
All right. The next question, I think, is one that probably a lot of people have in their mind is, do your garbage cans provide a effective barrier against food sources for raccoons, or should other measures be taken to make sure your garbage doesn't end up attracting raccoons or coyotes?
Coyotes. Yeah, so a coyote's not going to spend a ton of time like a bear would or something tearing apart a garbage can. But if your lid is, you put it out on the curb and your lid's ajar and there's garbage hanging out of it, that you might as well just put a big sign on it that says, "Come here, coyote. Come here, raccoon. Come here, crows." You got to keep your garbage in with the lid closed. If that lid's closed, then typically you're going to be okay. Like I said, coyotes aren't going to, and raccoons for that matter, they're not going to work extra hard when they can go find something easier. And so, like even in my own neighborhood, I see every single Wednesday, I see people put their cans out, and the next morning the crows just tear everything out and have garbage everywhere because they didn't have the lid closed. And so, so to answer your question, it is your can will definitely keep them out as long as you don't leave access for them to get in. They're going to go somewhere else and do something different.
All right, another question about someone who's walking their dogs. Is it, a lot of people go out at night to walk their dogs, and should that be a concern, or any suggestions for actions that you can take while you're out walking your dog? Since it is winter and it's dark a lot of hours a day, it's, people are out walking. It's, not uncommon for people to be walking their dog while it's
Sure.
dark.
Yeah, no, I would, if it was me, if I lived here and I know what I know with these coyotes, I wouldn't hesitate to walk outside at night with my dog. Um, it's always good to carry a whistle or something like that if you know there's a predator around, or if you're out, if you can walk with a couple people. A coyote's going to be less apt to approach with more people. The more noise you're making, the better. Carry a good flashlight, the air horn, whatever. If you have a small dog and you see a coyote, pick the dog up, make loud noises and try and deter that, make that coyote feel unwelcome. It's just basic things like that, and you should be fine. And like I said, I wouldn't even bat an eye. I'd be out every morning and every night in the dark. I wouldn't even, I would have no fear of walking my dog out there.
All right, another question about, I guess, deterrence is, would setting more rat traps help? I guess the idea of taking away a food source.
No, honestly, no. I mean, you can't control rats, right? I mean, it's like trying to control pigeons. Yeah, the rats, quite frankly, are not. I'm be willing to bet that that's not one of the biggest attractants on Mercer Island. That's not why they came to Mercer Island. They're not seeking out rats. My guess is that it's the fruit, it's the garbage, it's pets and pet food. Pets and pet food are probably the number one thing. If those two things change on the island significantly, the amount of coyote conflict calls the city gets are going to be reduced significantly. People keep their pets in, and then that is the number one attractant for coyotes is cats.
All right, got a couple more questions here. And I think I know the answer to this one, but the question is it legal to hunt and or trap coyotes on private property?
Okay, so that's not an easy one to answer because all jurisdictions or cities or counties are different. However, I'm going to take a wild guess, and Mike can jump in here if he wants to. But as far as hunting, I don't think that it's legal to hunt anything on Mercer Island. I know for a fact that discharging a firearm, I don't know for a fact. I mean, Mike, I'm assuming that discharging a firearm is illegal within city limits. Is that right, Mike?
Matt, you are correct. It is unlawful to hunt on Mercer Island.
Okay, so now you do have a right to protect property or your health and safety as a human, and so I can't. It would have to be a very significant threat, I think, for you to justify discharging or shooting a firearm. That's a call that I can't make because every situation's different. I mean, if I went out my backyard and a coyote was tangled up with my dog, even though it may be illegal to discharge a firearm, I can't tell people to do that, but I would do what I need to do to protect my animal. And it's a catch-22 there, because you have a right to do that, but you don't have a right to discharge a firearm. I've yet to meet a police officer in all my years who has written a ticket to somebody who was protecting some sort of human or animal life that was in direct threat by shooting. The thing is you have to know where you're responsible for the shot. You're responsible for that projectile, no matter what you're doing. So Mike probably has, his own view on that, or from the legal standpoint from the police. But from our standpoint, and from WDFW standpoint, is you do have a right to protect your property, but just shooting coyotes for the heck of it in your backyard isn't going to fly.
All right. Another question I think that people are obviously curious about is that there's been a spike in a rabbit population over the last couple of years, and is that correlated to increased coyote presence?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So there's what's called the predator prey curve. I'm sure some people out there know what this is, but when you have a high prey item, like let's say rabbits in this case, where their population starts to grow, and over a 4 or 5, 6 year span, then it starts to kind of peter out on top. Well, the predator curve follows right behind that. So typically it's a year difference. So if rabbits are like super high populated, say last year, then this year the coyote or other predator numbers would be super high. And then that prey curve will drop off the table and go right back down to virtually none. And the following year, the predator curve will do the same thing, either because the predators are eating them all, or the prey have worked themselves through a carrying capacity environmentally, and there's no more resources available for them to reproduce at a high rate. So if rabbits were really super high the last couple of years on Mercer Island, then that may very well be part of the reason why coyotes are here and want to stick around here. If the rabbits are starting to diminish, then you might see predators populations diminish.
All right, last question. I know you answered one previously about a 4-foot high fence, and someone would like to know, is a 6-foot high fence something that will keep coyotes out?
Yeah, a coyote can get in wherever it wants to. However, a 6-foot fence, unless you have a coyote that is extraordinarily brazen, they typically don't go. They're not going to jump that high or try to climb a fence that high. I'll come back to it. If the neighbor's got no fence, and the neighbor's not down the road, there's no fences and cats and pet food out or whatnot, they're going to go to where it's easiest. If you've got a 6-foot fence, I would feel very good about that.
All right, well, we are at the end of all of our questions. So I think at this point in time, we can wrap things up, unless Matt or Mike, you have any final thoughts?
Mike?
I guess just thank you to Matt. Thank you to Chris for facilitating this evening, and Matt for presenting. To the people that are watching, we understand that this is a frustrating and sometimes scary situation for many people. It's new to everyone on Mercer Island. That's why we brought in a coyote expert. As a lot of people said today, we have not seen a coyote issue like this here on the island, at least in the over 10 years that I've worked here. So as things change, we are open to acquiring new information, bringing in people for more assessments. So we understand that tonight is not the end of this, and we expect to continue to hear from people, and we will disseminate information as best we can. So thank you all for attending.
All right, good night, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.